Procurement, Grant Policy, and Compliance. I'm thrilled to be your host today. We're coming to you live from the campus of Stennis Space Center and the NASA Shared Services Center in Southern Mississippi. Special thanks to our hosts for today's event. Whether you're new to grants or cooperative agreements or just want a refresher, this event will provide valuable information to help you better understand what to expect when managing NASA awards. This event also realizes NASA's commitments made in the NASA Equity Action Plan. As part of the NASA Equity Action Plan, NASA has committed to promoting equity, diversity, and inclusion in all aspects of its operations, including grant and cooperative agreement funding. NASA recognizes that outreach to our recipients is a priority and is actively working to create an inclusive environment that encourages and supports recipients from all backgrounds. If you joined us in March for our first Ask NASA event, welcome back. You will see some familiar faces. Like the last event, we have a packed agenda with some amazing speakers who will share their insights and tips on how to successfully manage your NASA grant, as well as update you on some of the latest initiatives related to diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. We hope you will find this event informative, engaging, and helpful for your grants journey. The objectives of this Ask NASA event are to highlight the progress NASA has made on its grant-related commitments in the Equity Action Plan, discuss the federal government and NASA's post-award requirements, raise awareness of the types of funding programs available from NASA, and provide a forum for NASA stakeholders to hear directly from NASA subject matter experts and vice versa. Like the last event, our event today is going to be recorded for future reference. It will be posted on the NASA YouTube channel in the Grants and Cooperative Agreements playlist. Let's talk a little bit about our agenda for the day. In our first hour, we will hear from Antonise Crank, Chief of the NASA Office of Procurement, Grant Policy, and Compliance, and Chris Murguia, Senior Analyst in GPC, who will give us an overview of the DEIA goals and strategies at NASA and how they affect grant recipients and updates from the last Ask NASA event. Next, we will have Max Bernstein, the Science Mission Director's lead for research, who will discuss what actions SMD has taken in the DEIA space and highlight some of the SMD's DEIA activities. Next, we will have Sarah McGarvey, Grant Manager in the NASA Office of STEM Engagement, who will share the DEIA actions of the Office of STEM Engagement has taken, as well as highlighting some of OSTEM's programs and upcoming deadlines. Finally, in the first block, we will have Morgan Powell from the Office of Diversity and Equal Opportunity at NASA, who will highlight how ODEO strengthens NASA's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and ensures NASA's programs are models for inclusions and innovations, and fosters unity through strategic partnerships. In the hour following the DEIA segment, we will move on to the post-award grant management segment, where we will have a panel of experts from the NASA Shared Services Center seated to my left. They will cover topics such as reporting requirements, oversight and award management, closeout procedures, and more. The panelists are Latessa Nelson, the lead of the NASA Grants Activities Branch, Morris Hicks, Senior Grants Officer in the NASA Grants Activities Branch, and Mike Williams, Closeout Manager at the NSSC. After each of these blocks, we will have a Q&A session where you can ask the questions to the speakers using the chat function of WebEx. While our speakers do have important information to share with you, the event's focus is you all in the audience. Please feel free to type your questions in the chat box, and we will address as many as we can in our 2 dedicated Q&A periods. If your question is for a specific speaker, please indicate which speaker or topic your question is for when you type it in. We are so glad that you are here with us today and hope you enjoy this event. And thank you for choosing to partner with NASA, and we hope you are ready to ask NASA. So we are going to open the DEIA portion of our event today, and our first presenters in the room seated to my right are representing NASA Grant Policy and Compliance, Antonise Crank and Chris Murguia. So I will turn the floor over to them for their presentation.
All right, thanks, Corey, for the great introduction. Again, I am Antonise Crank. I am the Chief of Grants Policy and Compliance out of Headquarters Office of Procurement, PMPD, GPC, which is Grants Policy and Compliance. I'll be joined with my colleague, Christopher Murguia, as we discuss the DEIA information, overview, and feedback. And so as Corey mentioned, we do want to discuss our commitment to DEIA efforts. NASA initially released RFIs in June of 2021 and again in April of 2023 to gather information from the public regarding the barriers and challenges to the underserved community as it relates to grants and cooperative agreements. We received 195 comments from the public. We had an overwhelming response identifying the barrier of a lack of awareness and knowledge of NASA grants, programs, and policies. The RFI also indicated a need for NASA to forge new relationships with entities in which no NASA collaboration currently exists. And so what we want to talk about, this is just an overview of the information received. We want to let you all know that we heard everything that was, we read through everything that was received. We heard what the issues were, and we're actively working to address the concerns identified. So some of the outcomes. We developed external NASA grant resources and training materials. Corey mentioned in his opening delivery, the mention of NASA's YouTube channel. Within NASA's YouTube channel, we have released 5 grant trainings. We have a GPC, or Grants Policy and Compliance playlist. And so if you subscribe, you will receive information. Christian Diallo is actually dropping the link to those to the YouTube playlist in the chat that's available for you. We have 5 trainings that have been released. We will continue to release trainings as the year continues. This training here for you have been awarded, now what, will also be recorded and released into the YouTube playlist. We also developed 13 fact sheets, quick guides, and those guides are available within the GPC website. Christian Diallo, again, will release that link for you all. In the 13 guides, we have an overarching guide that just outlines the NASA grant and cooperative agreement landscape. And then we also have guides for each of the mission directorates that speaks to all of the grant programs within those mission directorates. And you'll also see some of the types of awards that are issued out of those mission directorates, as well as a PLC that you will be able to reach out to and connect with and build relationships accordingly. We increased outreach and engagement with underserved communities. So this is a new initiative for the Grants Policy and Compliance and NASA as a whole as it relates to grants. In 2023, we participated with and partnered with 12 organizations or 13 events across different organizations, such as, you'll find some of the examples here, the U.S. Black Chambers, as well as the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. And so in addition to partnering with organizations who are hosting events, we also are hosting this event today here, Ask NASA Part 2. And this is, again, a continuation of Ask NASA Part 1, in which we hosted in March of 2023. And so if you find these events helpful and you would like for NASA to continue to host Ask NASA events, feel free to drop in topics that spark your interest in the chat, as well as at the conclusion of this event, we will administer and deploy a survey where you can provide that information as well. In addition to the increased outreach and engagement with underserved communities, we are working to combine the Grant and Cooperative Agreement Manual and the Proposers Guide. So initially, and as of today, the guide that you will see is the Grants Cooperative Agreement Manual, as well as the Proposers Guide. So the Proposers Guide is just that. It's going to provide you information that you all will need to be equipped with as you navigate through the pre-award process. Once you move through the pre-award process, you will then need to access the GCAM to move through the award and through closeout, so the remaining phases of the grant's life cycle. One of the things that we would like to do, and we're moving to do, is to provide you a one-stop shop guide where you can walk through and navigate through the GCAM from cradle to grave, from pre-award to closeout. One of the other initiatives that we're looking to move forward to do is to extract some of the information. So the GCAM that you see today includes policies and procedures that are guides for our NASA internal staff. So what we're working to do is equip you all with a guide that's specifically for the external user, so specifically for the proposers and the grantees. And so you'll be able to utilize that guide through your entire grants lifecycle process, absent of information that should only be available to our internal staff. And so we talked about today as Ask NASA Part 2. Back in March, we hosted Ask NASA Part 1. The title of that event was What to Know Before Applying for NASA Grants and Cooperative Agreements. That training, if you missed it, is available on NASA's YouTube page, again, the GPC playlist. The purpose of that event was to answer questions and remove the uncertainty around applying for NASA Grants and Cooperative Agreement funding. We had a particular focus on outreach to underserved communities and organizations. However, anyone was welcome at that time to attend if you just needed a refresher. And again, that training is available on our YouTube channel. 13% of our registrants were from HBCUs, 16% were from MSIs that are not classified as HBCUs. 45% of our registrants and participants had never applied for NASA grant funding. 56% were not aware of how to access NASA grant funding opportunities. And so the event was really helpful. We received great feedback. We're looking forward to the feedback following this event. And again, this event is a continuation of NASA Part 1, which focused on pre-award. We're now focusing on post-award. And I'll repeat again because it bears repeating. If you are finding the Ask NASA Grant and Cooperative Agreement events helpful, let us know if this is something that you would like for us to continue and any of the topic areas that spark interest for your entity or organization.
Thank you, Anthony's. Appreciate that. Good afternoon, everyone. So Anthony's just provided an overview of Ask NASA Part 1 that we hosted back in March of this year. After we hosted Ask NASA Part 1, we provided a survey to the participants asking them for their feedback related to grants management challenges that they might have. And that feedback can generally be categorized into 3 categories. The first category for feedback was pertaining to funding opportunities. Essentially, the participants were stating that some of our funding opportunities are confusing, it's difficult to find requirements, or there might have been contradictory requirements in a single funding opportunity. The second category of feedback pertained to resources or lack thereof. Essentially, we had entities stating that their organization didn't have the time or the personnel necessary to develop proposals in response to funding opportunities. The third category pertained to perceived biases in the competition process. There was an entity that felt that some organizations have a quote unquote in with NASA, and because of that in connection with NASA, they were more likely to obtain grants and cooperative agreements from our agency. So that's kind of the general feedback that we received, and I'd like to next discuss how NASA has addressed some of that feedback. Next slide, please. Okay, so we've taken some action, and some of those actions were in direct response to the feedback we received after Ask NASA, and some of it was not necessarily in direct response to that feedback, but it still addresses that feedback regardless. So when it comes to difficulties in navigating our notices of funding opportunities, which we might also call NOFOs or solicitations at NASA, we've taken 2 actions. The first is that we've expanded the posting of our NOFOs to NASA's Minority Serving Institution, MSI Exchange. The MSI Exchange is hosted by NASA's Office of STEM Engagement. It essentially is a tool for connecting NASA researchers, industry personnel, and MSIs to facilitate collaborative research amongst those entities. And the MSI Exchange posts a newsletter. We post some of our NOFOs in that newsletter. And this is an attempt to get those NOFOs out to an audience that might not have seen those NOFOs in the past. The second action that we've taken is to standardize the NOFO template that we use at NASA. So we want, to the greatest extent possible, all of the NOFOs to have similar language where it's practical, right? So that we don't have different standard language in each of our programs NOFOs. When it comes to resources, when it comes to resources or the lack thereof when applying to grant opportunities, we've also taken some action to help mitigate that and to afford entities more time when applying to NASA's funding opportunities. The first action that we've taken is to expand the NASA acquisition forecast to include grant and cooperative agreement opportunities. Historically, the acquisition forecast only provided information on NASA contract opportunities, and it would tell the public about forthcoming contract opportunities. So for example, it might say something like In a year, NASA will be seeking contracts for facilities management. Right now, we've included grant and cooperative agreement opportunities in there. So you might see that in a year, for example, NASA will be soliciting grant proposals for heliophysics research, just as an example. Okay? So this gives entities more time to prepare for funding opportunities that are coming down the road. Although we're posting our funding opportunities to the acquisition forecast, we'll continue to still post into grants.gov, into NASA's proposal intake system, called the NASA Solicitation Proposal Integrated Review and Evaluation System, or INSPIRES. The second action we've taken in response to this feedback is to use the Federal Demonstration Partnership, or FDP, platform to, again, advertise some of our funding opportunities. The FDP is a collaborative group of about 10 federal research funding agencies and about 200 institutions of higher education, and their goal is to reduce administrative burden in the federal government research environment. Highly recommend, if your institution is not a member of the FDP, take a look at their website, see if the FDP is an organization that might benefit you if you're not currently a member of this institution or this organization. The FDP meets 3 times a year, either virtually or in person in Washington, D.C. NASA provides an update at each FDP meeting, and we highlight some of our key funding opportunities during those federal agency updates. Lastly, as I mentioned before, there's a perception of bias or some entities having a quote unquote in with NASA during the competition process. One action that NASA has taken is expanding the use of the dual anonymous peer review, or DAPR, evaluation process. My colleague Max Bernstein will speak to this a little bit more in his session, which is right after this. But essentially what DAPR is a way to mitigate unconscious bias in the application or proposal. Next slide, please. So we've talked a lot about what we have done, right? What we've done in FY23. These actions won't stop in FY24. So in FY24, we have a few diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility DEI goals. For grants policy and compliance, which is where Anthony and I sit, we have 2 goals that we'd like to reach in 2024. The first is to continue outreach events. And Anthony's already mentioned that we achieved some in FY23. In 24, our goal is 4 outreach events at events that target traditional and underserved communities. Second goal is to continue training and education activities. Our goal is to post at least 6 trainings to the NASA YouTube playlist that Anthony's mentioned, and we'll continue to post those throughout the year. Secondly, our Science Mission Directorate, or SMD, they will continue some of their DEI-related activities. One, as I mentioned, is continued use of the dual anonymous peer review, or DAPR, review process. And the second is a new program that we started called the Bridge Program. I will speak to that as my colleague Max Bernstein will speak to that next in his session. And that is it for me, and thank you very much, Corey.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you guys for that presentation. That was great. So as Chris alluded to, our next speaker is in fact Max Bernstein from the Science Mission Directorate. I'm going to turn the floor over to Max now for his presentation.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'm Max. I'm from the Science Mission Directorate. And next slide, please. Despite what the title being post-award, actually, a lot of what I'm going to talk about is actually pre-award. So there is our institutional email address, sarah@nasa.gov. You may always send questions there, and it's confidential. So what I'm going to talk about today are these 4 things: removing obstacles to submitting proposals, removing possible sources of bias in the review of proposals, and that relates to dual anonymous peer review. We'll hear more about that. And then I provide some links to some online resources. And then finally, I'm going to talk about some specific opportunities. Next slide. Okay, so slide, and the formatting has changed. So we have this large omnibus solicitation for research in science, and it's called Roses, and it's this big monster, and it has over 100 different individual opportunities within it, each with its own topic and point of contact and due date. And for Roses 23, the Roses that's out right now, that link will take you to an HTML table, a web table, that has all of the different opportunities sorted by research area, like earth science or heliophysics or whatever. And then each one of the titles is a hypertext link that takes you to the page where one can read the opportunity. And the next year, Roses 24 will come out in mid-February. And if you save that, and if you just change the 23 to 24, it'll take you to Roses 24. So anyway, this year in Roses, we have about 14 of these so-called program elements that are no due date. So one may submit a proposal at any time. This is very convenient, and it's very popular among proposers because one isn't fretting about, oh my gosh, if something goes wrong just before the due date and I'm going to make it on time, not to worry, takes the pressure off. And like I said, there are these, I will be talking about some specific opportunities in Roses that are for folks who maybe don't usually propose to NASA or to the Science Mission Directorate, including the Bridge program, Here to Observe, and NASA Innovation Corps, which will be described on subsequent slides. Next slide, please. Okay, so first of all, we do have a few program elements that are what we call budget later. And that is to say that one either need not provide any budget information at all at the beginning, or if it is required, it's just sort of an estimate. The idea is to have people writing proposals where they're focusing on the science rather than spending time working out the details of the budget, which don't matter if you don't get selected, right? Next slide, please. Dual anonymous peer review, as was previously mentioned, it's actually even more popular than was indicated on one of the earlier slides. This year, it's over 30. I think last year it was close to 30 program elements that use this so-called dual anonymous peer review. I have a link here that will take you to a page that has more information on dual anonymous peer review, and there's a talk there and stuff like that. But basically, the short version is the proposer submits a proposal, and that proposal does not identify the proposer. No names of people, no names of organizations. The reviewers are reviewing a technical proposal with no indication of the person or organization that is behind it. And the idea is to try to remove bias that one might have, either related to an individual or perhaps just the presumption that certain well-known universities like Harvard or Howard are better. Pardon me. And so that's the point of the dual anonymous peer review. If you want to know more, you can ask or you can follow the links. Next slide, please. So here's some preliminary information that we have based on what we now know about some results from dual anonymous peer review. First of all, we had an indication, the first programs where this was applied were the Hubble Guest Observer programs, and now James Webb Guest Observer programs. And the results so far indicate that there used to be this delta between male-led and female-led proposals, where the male-led PIs had a higher win rate. And so that disparity has basically been greatly reduced, if not completely eliminated within statistical uncertainties. Now, one thing we do know for sure, it is definitely statistically significant, is the proportion of Hubble proposals that are selected that are led by first-time PIs. So that's really nice. That strongly suggests that we are reducing a barrier to proposing. Finally, similarly, the success rates for primarily undergraduate institutions and non-R1 MSIs have approximately doubled. And people just like doing anonymous peer review. Next slide, please. Lately, we have done a pilot study where we have proposers submit inclusion plans as part of their research proposals. And these inclusion plans are assessed and feedback is provided, but under the pilot study, the results of the inclusion plan are not part of the ultimately of the selection or declination decision. And there's some information about this and links on this slide. Next slide, please. Okay, so I wanted to, just for those of you who may actually be thinking about writing proposals, or you know people who are, I wanted to just point out a couple opportunities. So one is on the For Researchers website from the Science Mission Directorate, which is science.nasa.gov/researchers. As you can see there, one of the opportunities that we have is for people to sign up to be volunteer reviewers of submitted proposals. And that is a great way to learn about, well, at least how not to write a proposal, if not how to write one. Next slide, please. There are, on that same website, in the section that's called the Library and Useful Links, there are a number of things that would be helpful to anyone who is thinking about submitting a proposal to the Science Mission Directorate. Frankly, in many cases, the advice is just good for anybody who's working on any kind of science proposal at all. I've reproduced a bunch of the links here. There are talks about writing proposals. And if you're specifically interested in roses, there's a link down there to the What's New in Roses 23 talk. And I have a link there to the YouTube playlist. But of course, the grants policy has already presented that. Next slide, please. So I promised to talk about a few specific programs. Here's one, the Bridge Seed Funding Program. This is one of these programs that has no due date, so no pressure. There are links here to the call for proposals and other related information. And I strongly encourage you to look at this Bridge Seed Funding Program because it is specifically to set up partnerships so that under-resourced institutions can develop collaborations that will ultimately result in proposals to us. We hope that will come to us in the Science Mission Directorate. So that's a really cool program. Next slide, please. Research Initiation Awards. Similarly, this is for organizations that don't normally propose to NASA, and specifically undergraduate institutions. And so now, unfortunately, for this year, the due date for this program has passed, but we do plan to offer this again in Roses 2024. So I wanted to tell you about it in hopes that you'll keep an eye out for that in mid-February. Next slide. And then finally, another really interesting opportunity for for institutions that host undergraduate students. The Here to Observe is a special program where an institution, a group of undergraduates from an institution, gets connected to a NASA mission in planetary science. And the idea is to have those undergraduates get connected with the scientists who are working on the mission, even attend mission team meetings. It's really interesting. And so there you have a link to the page and a name and a contact email address for that program. And next slide, please. Yes. The Citizen Science seed funding program, this one is specifically targeted at folks who do space science and who plan on using citizen scientists in order to, for example, collect the data. And that one is, the notices of intent are coming up in next month and proposals early in 2024. And then again, here's a link to the Inspires page where the call for proposals is hosted and the name and the email address of the pointed contact. This one does not include Earth Science because Earth Science has its own citizen science program. But anyway, that one's really another just really neat program. And I think that may be the last one. Next slide, please. Okay. So yeah, that's it for me. Max, Science Mission Directorate, Roses. I'll stick around later when you ask questions, but also very easy to remember our email address. It's sarah@nasa.gov. You can always just send a question. Thanks very much.
Max, thank you so much for that presentation. That was great. We do actually have a couple questions for you. So I appreciate you hanging out. We'll get to those in the Q&A section. Our next presenter is Sarah McGarvey from the Office of STEM Engagement. I'm going to turn the floor over to Sarah for her presentation on STEM programs and DEIA activities. Take it away, Sarah.
Hello, everyone. So good to be with you this afternoon. My name is Sarah McGarvey. I'm the OSTEM Grants Manager. This is a new position. I started with OSTEM in February 2023. And I'm going to do a quick overview of the OSTEM program, Office of STEM Engagement, and 4 projects that we have. I'm going to focus a little bit more on our MURAP program, and then recap some deadlines, some current solicitations and future solicitations. And I'll also be online for the chat and accessible via email in the future as needed. Next slide, please. So NASA's Office of STEM Engagement is committed to inspiring students. As you can see here, we have three strategic goals at the bottom. The first is to create unique opportunities for a diverse set of students to contribute to NASA's work in exploration and discovery. Secondly, to build a diverse future STEM workforce. And then our third goal is to attract a diverse group of students to STEM to spark interest and to provide connections to NASA's mission and work. And next slide, please. So this overview shows the 4 projects that make up the OSTEM program: Space Grant, EPSCoR, MURAP, and Next Gen STEM. And there's a little history on each of these projects. To the left, you can see drivers that align a more holistic function to the right, and these are interconnected with NASA's mission areas. To the left, Earth, humans in space, Moon to Mars, solar system flight, space technology, and additionally to the right, we have 4 functional areas: educational tools, and performance and evaluation, strategic partnerships, and internships. And then all of these support our beneficiaries of students from kindergarten through college. Next slide, please. So MURAP's vision is to enhance the research, academic, and technological capabilities at minority serving institutions by providing authentic student learning experiences related to NASA's mission, contribute to a diverse STEM workforce. And you can see we have 4 pillars. These are very important for MURAP, and I'm going to talk about them a little bit more on another slide. We can move to the next, please. All right, this shows the fiscal year 2023 MURAP investments. As you can see, as of September 2023, we've obligated over 25 million with 156 awards to 86 minority serving institutions in 37 states and territories. Next slide, please. These are our executive orders, and you can see quite a few on here. They're established. MURAP is established to increase NASA's responsiveness to these executive orders. And I wanted to note some of these had some recent updates. The executive orders have been signed under the current White House administration to reestablish and rename a few. So the White House Initiative on Advancing Educational Equity, Excellence, and Economic Opportunity for Hispanics, and then the Executive Order for Advancing Educational Equity, Excellence, and Economic Opportunity through historically Black college and universities. So it's important to note that these executive orders have new numbers. Next slide, please. And you can see here how we engage minority serving institutions. I have the 4 pillars: research and capacity building, curriculum development, student engagement, and partnerships. And the pillars result in outcomes to the right, like broadening a minority serving institute support and student success. And I wanted to highlight 2 federal agency collaborations. MURAP has a partnership with the Department of Education for our Upward Bound Pre-College Institute activity. And then we are also partnering with the National Science Foundation via MURAP Includes. And Includes stands for MURAP Inclusion across the nation of communities of learners, of underrepresented discoverers, and engineering and sciences. Next slide, please. Chris, I believe, had mentioned the MSI exchange. So there's already a link in the chat, but this is an excellent tool to connect with other MSIs. There's over 800 MSIs, and the tool helps industry, higher education, and research communities collaborate. So we encourage you to check that out. Thanks for the link. Next slide, please. All right, I wanted to highlight some collaboration in MURAP. And this spring, OSTEM partnered with the Office of Procurement and the Office of Small Business Programs to support hybrid road tour. This was in conjunction with the University of Central Florida, and 156 attendees shared best practices and strategies. And folks also attended the Ford Kennedy Space Center. Next, please. A few weeks ago, NASA attended the National Historically Black College and University Week in Arlington, Virginia, and MURAP hosted a MITIC hackathon. MITIC stands for MURAP Innovation and Tech Transfer Idea Competition. MITIC is made up of student teams attending minority serving institutions, and this group also toured Goddard Space Flight Center and did a special viewing of the color of space. Next slide, please. All right, as you can see, we have some upcoming funding opportunities. Space Grant 59 Quest opened September 28th, and EPSCoR has a solicitation that just opened this week. We also have noted some other upcoming solicitations, and I wanted to note or reiterate, as Antonice and her team has mentioned, we are now in the acquisition forecast. This is new, and we're hoping to broaden our outreach to small disadvantaged businesses, women-owned small businesses, and disadvantaged communities. So that's one of our tools, in addition to our Inspires landing page, and all of our solicitations are on grants.gov. So you can find all these opportunities in 3 different spots. Next slide, please. So interns are the heart of NASA, and last year we partnered with over 2,200 interns. And you can see some upcoming application deadlines. For summer, the deadline is February 2nd, and then for fall 2024, our deadline is February 23rd. Next slide, please. All right, in addition to internships, we have a partnership with graduate degrees for minorities in engineering, and the summer deadline just closed, but I wanted to share that with you and share the numbers of our active fellows and fellows from minority serving institutions. And this wraps up our update. And you can access our websites on that slide. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I really appreciate that. And we will, as we mentioned at the top of the event, we will make these slides available to everyone, so you will have access to all those links on how to connect with OSTEM and all of the other links available once we send those out. Our next presenter is Morgan Powell in the Office of Diversity and Equal Opportunity. I'm going to turn over the microphone to Morgan for his presentation on the role of ODEO and diversity and inclusion at NASA.
Hi, thank you. As you stated, my name is Morgan Powell with the Office of Diversity and Equal Opportunity. Within that department, I work for the EOPD, which is Equal Opportunity Programs Division. Now, what we are responsible for is really assessing your program's environment or DEIA policies and programs once you receive the funding. Next slide, please. So part of my office's strategic objectives, there's 3 I want to cover. The first one is just we want to strengthen NASA's commitment to DEIA in the STEM fields and in your academic communities. The second one, and which is probably the most important and which I'll cover in later slides, is we want to help you create research environments in NASA-funded STEM programs that are models for safety, inclusion, and innovation that foster educational opportunity for all your students and participants. And then the third one, we want to foster unity through strengthened strategic partnerships with you and NASA as we conduct this research. So how do we do that? So once your program receives funding, my office will assess your environments. Going back to that second bullet there, we'll be assessing your program and environments for that inclusive kind of aspect. Can you go to the next slide, please? So how do we do that? Our assessment includes 4 civil rights statutes that we look at. The first one, which is Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Title VI prohibits discrimination based on race and national origin. The second one is Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972. That regulation prohibits regulation prohibits sex-based discrimination. And then Section 504 of the Rehab Act, that statute prohibits discrimination based on disability. And the last one, Age Discrimination Act of 1975, which prohibits discrimination based on age. So we're looking at those 4 statutes. Well, we'll come in, we will assess the environment through interviews, through surveys, through analysis of your programs and procedures, and help you and provide some technical assistance to ensure your environment is free of or prohibits those types of discrimination. Next slide, please. So all of this information can be captured in our Mission STEM website. That's your one-stop shop where we will provide readily available critical information on our civil rights compliance requirements. So those are those assessments that I just covered. We also like to showcase our best practices, that we go out to the field and glean from those environments what you're doing well, what we can help you with. And it's just our way of really touching all of our grantees that receive money from NASA. So feel free to peruse the website, learn more about kind of those requirements, what happens when you receive that federal funding. Once you receive that federal funding, your organization will commit to fostering the environment under those 4 laws. On a 3-year annual basis, you'll reaffirm that commitment under those 4 civil rights statutes as well. Great, next slide, please. So one of those statutes, again, I covered Title VI, Title IX, Section 504, and the Age Discrimination Act. Title IX in particular is something that NASA has highlighted under Gender Equity Plan. So Title IX, as I stated earlier, prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex in any education or training program. Next slide, please. So as we assess your environment and your program and policies, we like to pull out what we call promising practices. And again, that's to share among all of our grantees what's working, what needs improvement, and how we can better provide technical assistance through our partnership with you. So some of the promising practices that we've taken from our grantees in the past are outlined on this slide. Strong affinity groups, bringing in diverse backgrounds and speakers, so the students or the research people can see themselves in those leading administrators. Also, a simple complaint process. So in your environment, there is a mechanism where people can submit their complaints or inquiries to NASA directly, and we can take a look at that and make sure that your environment has those policies and procedures in place to assist aggrieved individuals. And again, going back to a previous slide, our Mission STEM website has more information for you in assisting you in responding to our assessments. Next slide, please. Great, and feel free to reach out. This is our standard email box. That will come directly to our office, and we can, again, provide more technical assistance with you. My name is Morgan Powell. I'm with ODEO, the Office of Diversity and Equal Opportunity in the Equal Opportunity Programs Division. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you so much, Morgan, for that presentation. I really appreciate that. It is now time for our first of 2 Q&A periods. I'm going to start off with the pre-submitted questions submitted during the registration process. So as we're discussing the questions, if you feel, please feel free to post your DEI-related questions in the chat box, and we will get to as many as we can in the time that we have allotted. Since we just heard from Morgan, I actually want to toss Morgan the first question here about compliance issues that he sees in ODEO, particularly as it relates to post-award. Morgan, how can you talk about some compliance issues that NASA ODEO sees after an award is issued, and what are some recommended remedies? Morgan, I think you're muted.
Sorry. I touched on the receiving organization's commitment to DEIA. That commitment is outlined in what we call our NASA Form 1206. This is an assurance of compliance with those 4 statutes. So one of the things that we looked at is, how do we get that form in front of the right people? So let's imagine you're a big university and signed out all this paperwork about receiving the grant. This one form basically assures your compliance with those 4 civil rights laws. So what we did is we added some signature lines for general counsel that may or may not be applicable to your organization, your Title IX program manager. We just wanted to make sure that this form gets the right eyes on it, because you're really reaffirming that commitment that you have the programs, the policies, and the individuals in place to assess your environment and prohibit those 4 acts of discrimination. So we've strengthened the form. We've also included language with the gender equity plan, NASA's commitment with DEIA. So that assurance of compliance form, we want it to be taken seriously, but we also, that's our first kind of opportunity to engage with our funded research organizations and universities. Thanks.
Awesome, Morgan. Thank you so much for that. I want to turn the next question. Actually, I want to ping back to Max for, he actually put in some information in the box related to a question on dual anonymous peer review. Max, I know you answered this question in the chat box, but I'm wondering if you could expand upon your answer a little bit, if you are able to. The question was about how you can highlight personal contributions and work with the new anonymized proposals.
Right. Obviously, I went very quickly and I glossed over all kinds of details. On that webpage, and also along with every solicitation, every one of the 30 opportunities that do dual anonymous peer review, we have specific instructions. And the truth is that we don't just say, sorry, you can't talk about that. What we do actually is we have the proposers break their proposal into two parts. There's an anonymized part, but then there's the other part where there's all kinds of information that would identify the proposers, right? Like their CVs and bio sketches and stuff like that. And then we give instructions and we have specific examples where we talk about how one would, in an anonymous manner, say, oh, yeah, without naming your name, how you would, reference prior work and say, oh, it's been established, reference that, this correlation has been done, and, you can say, we have access to this facility or whatever. So there are ways of talking about these things without identifying the proposer. And like I said, to reassure you, after the initial assessment of the merit of the technical part of the proposal, there is this reveal for the proposals that are in the selectable range. There is this reveal, there's verification step. So yeah, lots of details there. So go ahead and take a look at that Dapper webpage. And if the particular Rose's program element to which you are proposing is one of these Dapper ones, there will be text both within the PDF of the opportunity and also under other documents. There will be examples. So there's a lot of stuff there. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of interest in dual anonymous peer review generally. So any opportunity to talk about Dapper is a good opportunity, Max. So I really appreciate the clarity on that question. I want to actually, the next question is for you, Max, as well. I wanted to sort of pull on the string of the inclusion plan, and the question that we got from the pre-registration question was about if the inclusion plan will become part of the award selection criteria for all program elements going forward. And if so, is there a plan to create a rubric or train reviewers on evaluating the inclusion plans?
Okay. I don't know that it will become a required element, a required part of all proposals for all Rose's opportunities, but I think the number is increasing. The reviewers, the way we're doing it actually is we're not having the folks who are selected for their technical expertise, in recombination in, solar, wind, and magnetic fields. We're not having people who are technical experts review the inclusion plans. We're not doing that. We're having folks who know about inclusion assess the inclusion plans. So they do understand it. And we have what I hope are fairly clear questions that appear in the Rose's summary of solicitation. So those are the things against which the inclusion plans are being evaluated. Ultimately, yeah, I think that there will be more. Right now, this is a pilot study. And so folks are getting feedback on their inclusion plans from these experts. But ultimately, don't sweat it, right? Like if you don't do it just right, it doesn't matter. No one gets declined because of this, right? Like you write your proposal, you add your inclusion plan, you're going to get feedback on your inclusion plan, and then that's going to be good. That's going to help you do the things that you proposed to make your project more inclusive. So it can only help, it can't hurt. So please don't be anxious about it. I hope that helped.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was very helpful, Max. Again, thank you for the clarification on that question. The next question I want to go to is for Sarah, actually from OSTEM. I wanted to ask you if you could talk a little bit about the commitments that OSTEM has in NASA's strategic plan.
Yes. In the strategic plan for DEAI, there are definitely a couple elements I can speak to in recent examples of collaboration. So one in particular, I mentioned that Space Grant X59 solicitation. And so in the strategic DEAI plan, we are enhancing our partnerships with our mission directorates and other partners. And so with our active solicitation, we've collaborated with an ARMD embed, and we also have a National Science Foundation detailee on detail to us to help support the solicitation. And OSTEM is also expanding access to Spanish speakers. So with this solicitation, we are excited to launch a Spanish Quest Supersonic STEM toolkit with resources targeted for both K through 5 and then grade 6 through 8. So I can drop some links in the chat that. And secondly, after that, in the strategic EAI plan, we are also conducting an external K through 12 stakeholder needs assessment and a gap assessment. So in June, I attended a broadening student participation listening session with award recipients, and the recipients spoke about their barriers and solutions to a range of subjects, including physical access to audience or socio and economic cultural factors. So for instance, some folks are collaborating with partners by bringing mobile science lab to rural communities. And so OSTEM is very engaged in that strategic DEAI action plan.
Sarah, actually, while we still have you, there is a question for you in the chat. Is NASA Miro Institutional Research Center solicitation, i.e., one allowed per institution?
I can look into that and get back to you. We are releasing that solicitation this quarter, and this is the first time I'm working with Miro, so I can look into that and circle back.
Awesome. The last question we're going to take in this block is from Renee, I believe. It's something that we may actually touch on in the next section. It's for the Q&A session. I would like to bring up that it is very frustrating that we cannot view awards in a system similar to NIH ERA Commons. Additionally, it seems only NOAs are sent to PIs and AOR submitting the application. Is it possible to add email addresses in a proposal field to where NOA emails are to be sent? So I'll sort of address that to Max and Sarah to see if you guys have any thoughts about if from a program perspective, being able to communicate with the NSSC when awards are made about who those awards are sent to once they are recommended for approval.
Well, I mean, with regard to how the NSSC communicates specifically, I mean, I think maybe Teresa Stanley might be better um, suited to answer that question. Or was the question, I wasn't totally sure. Is this um, just about communicating award information for awards from their organization? Or was this more generally about all the awards that NASA makes? I wasn't totally sure.
Yeah, I think that was, I think maybe let's address it in the next block. So I think that maybe we can have the NSSC sort of address that in the next Q&A period. So with that, I will actually, perfect segue, move to the Q&A period, as I mentioned, that we will have at the end of the next segment. We're going to switch gears now to the post-award grant management segment. And we will start this portion of the event with a presentation from Latessa Nelson, the lead of the Grants Activities Branch, and Morris Hicks, Senior Grants Officer in the NASA Grants Activities Branch. Both of them are seated to my left. So I will turn over the microphone to them for their presentation on post-award.
Good afternoon. This is the NSSC Grants Activities Branch overview. Here's a look at our branch personnel. The branch chief is Teresa Stanley. The lead is myself, Latessa Nelson. The team is divided into two groups. The award team that awards all the new grants and cooperative agreements for the agency. The administration team, which are the administrative grant officers, and they are assigned by center. Each member on that team may be assigned one or more NASA centers. We have 4 members on the award team and 6 members on the administration team. Next. The next few slides will take a look at roles and responsibilities from the NASA Shared Services Center grants team's point of view. For roles and responsibilities, we award and administer all the grants and cooperative agreements for the agency, monitor the grants for compliance. We maintain the official award file, and we serve as the liaison between NASA and the recipient. Next slide. The award recipient roles and responsibilities is to complete the substantive work of the approved proposal, and of course, implement the award in compliance with awards terms and conditions. Draw down funds for expenses as they are incurred. If the recipient has expended $750,000 or more in federal funding, be prepared to obtain a single audit and submit the required reports, such as the final performance and any additional reports outlined in the term conditions in a timely manner. Next slide, please. For the AGOs will be the ones you contact when you want to, if there's a modification to the award, such as a PI change, augmentations, no-cost extensions, scope of work changes. They also review the reports, the financial and the performance. AGOs are the only ones that can approve recipient prior approval requests. Of course, they monitor the awards for compliance, review and approve payment requests, and terminate awards if needed. Next slide. The technical officers serve as the subject matter experts, and of course, they perform monitoring activities to ensure the recipients meet project objectives. They review the performance reports and work closely with the administrative grant officers on changes to the awards. Next. Once the NSSC receives a technical requirements package and makes the award, a notice of award is submitted to the recipients via email. And in that package, it includes an award letter, a NASA Form 1687, award terms, required publications and reports, and the points of contact sheet. Next slide, please. Here's a look at the NASA Form 1687. On this form, you'll see you have your federal award identification number, the period of performance, the proposal title. It also includes the total amount of the award, the funds obligated. And if you could go to the next slide, please. Here you'll see in block 12, this is your NASA points of contacts. These are the points of contacts that you will be communicating with throughout the life cycle of the grant. It is your administrative grant officer and your technical officer. At the bottom of this form is a signing grant officer, and that is the awarding grant officer. And if you can see the red box where it says recipient, that is just to indicate that once a recipient draws down funds from the payment management system, that is acceptance of the award. The recipient is not required to sign this form and send it back to the grant officer for acceptance of the award. Next slide. Once the recipient receives a grant and cooperative agreement, they are required to comply with various regulations and policies for the award terms and conditions. Those regulations and policies are 2 CFR 200, the Code of Federal Regulations, 2 CFR 1800, which are NASA-specific regulations, the Grant Cooperative Agreement Manual, which is NASA's grants policy guide, and the Notice of Funding Opportunity if it contains project-specific requirements. Prior approvals are required from the grant officer. The grant officer is the only one that can approve prior approvals. And those are changes to the award scope or budget. If there's a 25% reduction in the PI's time, or 3 months or more, like a disengagement from the project. If there's a procurement of equipment items that were not previously proposed and approved, and that includes sub-awards as well. You can find a full list of these requirements at 2 CFR 200.407. And these requirements may be waived for awards that are subject to the research terms and conditions. And that information is in the prior approval matrix, which is also provided in the notice of award. Thanks. Requests for prior approvals are submitted to the administrative grant officer via email. It's the NSSD contact center, and that email address is on the NASA form 1687 and block 12. Again, technical officers cannot approve any requests. Those can only be approved by the grant officer, but they must be copied on the request for TO concurrence. Once the AGO receives the request, they'll review it and provide approval or disapproval via email, and then make the determination if a supplement or a memo to the file is needed. The award recipient must keep a copy of this response for their records.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Morris Six, and I'm a grant officer here at NASA Shared Service Center. NASA's three-tiered monitoring approach. The first approach is a pre-award risk assessment. During the pre-award risk assessment, NASA is evaluating the organization and also the proposal that's submitted for award. And some of the evaluations that we're reviewing are the financial stability, audit findings, organizational history, and also award specific. The next monitoring approach is routine monitoring. During the routine monitoring phase, we're reviewing the award performance of all NASA awards. And then the final approach for monitoring is advanced monitoring, and this is for high risk awards. Next slide, please. The overview of the POWER tool, the pre-award risk assessment tool, there's 6 tabs. The first tab is the overview of the tool. In order for us to be, NASA to be compliant with the 2 CFR 200 and also the grants and cooperative agreement manual, NASA established the PARA tool. The purpose of the PARA tool is to assess fraud, waste, and abuse, the potential for fraud, waste, and abuse with award recipients. The risk is a description of NASA's risk indicators, and those risk indicators are in 3 categories that we look for, and that's administration, the programmatic, and the compliance, and also your financial. The third tab is your entity specific assessment. This assessment is evaluation questions, really looking at your organization. And this entity specific assessment is held on file for 3 years, and every 3 years you'll be reevaluated. And at the end of the entity, a specific assessment, there's a score. The tab number 4 is your award specific assessment. This contains award specific evaluation questions. For every award, new award that we're reviewing, there would be an assessment done on that award. The total combined scores from the entity and assessment and the award specific assessment will get your total overall score, which will be tab number 5, which will end up being your risk mitigation. And tab number 6 is your authoritative reference. All the evaluation questions are referenced from the 2 CFR 200. Next slide. So there's 3 levels to low risk, medium risk, and high risk for the pre-award risk assessment. Tier 1 is your low risk, and the score is from 0 to 50%, and the requirement is routine monitoring only. Tier 2 is medium risk, and that score is from 51% to 80%. The requirements are routine monitoring and also the possible conditions. Give you an example of additional terms, conditions could be your progress reports. Normally, your progress reports are due annually. If there's some type of issue, if you fall into this category tier 2, then we may require you to submit your reports on a quarterly basis or semi-annual basis. And another example of being in tier 2 additional terms and conditions could be how you receive your payment. Instead of being able to go in the payment management system and draw down your fund as needed, we would ask you to pay your invoices, then submit your receipts to your grant officer for review and for reimbursements. And tier 3 is high risk, and that scores from 81% to 100%. And the requirements there is routine monitoring, additional terms and conditions, and a desk review or a site visit. So that's tier 3. Next. Key components of routine monitoring plan. The first key component is required reporting. You have your annual performance reports that are due annually. These are just some of the samples of the reports that are required. The interim new technology summary report that is due on the anniversary date of your award. Also, your annual NASA Form 1018 property of custody of contractors. This report is coming due. If you have not submitted it yet, it's due October 15th. And also this, if you don't have any property or government furnished property or government furnished equipment, you are still required to present a negative report. And another example is Federal Funding, Accounting and Transparency Act, FAFTA. If you have a subcontractor and they're receiving more than $30,000, you're required to report that. So these are examples of some of the required reporting. Another key component to routine monitoring is financial reporting, and that is your quarterly federal cash transaction report, or your FCTR. Your FCTR is actually due, if you have not submitted it yet through the payment management system, is actually due October 30th of this month. So if you have not done it, please submit your report in a timely manner. Moving forward for the next, for this quarter, at the end of the quarter, which would be in December, we're moving to the federal financial report, which will also be completed in the payment management system. And just please make sure that you're submitting your reports in a timely manner. And the final key component of routine monitoring is the transactional testing. Each grant will be reviewed every 5 years. And it's going to be reviewed to make sure there's no unallowable, unallocable, or unreasonable costs. If your grant is only for a period of performance is 1 year or less, you will not be required to receive transactional testing review. But if you request a no-cost extension and it's for 12 months, if it's for 12 months, then you will be required to have a transaction testing review. And all transaction testing review requirements for the program will be completed within 90 days. Next slide. Here's an example of some of the required reportings that are due throughout the life cycle of the grant. You'll see the reports on the left side, the frequency of the reports in the center of the graph, and then to the right is who you actually submit those reports to. Next slide, please. required publications and reports for the final. So at the end of the period performance, you have final reports that are due as well. And on the left-hand side of the sample of final reports, the frequency of when you have to submit those reports. And then the right-hand corner is also when you send those reports due. Next slide, please. Post-award report requirements, your performance reports. They're as directed as indicated in the required publications and reports. And please don't forget, your final is due within 120 days of your completion date. The SF 425s or your federal or your FCTRs, and moving forward, it would be your FFRs. They're due online, their quarterly submission. They're due 30 days after the period performance ends. So please always get those reports in a timely manner. And also your final SF 425 is due within 120 days completion of the award. Next slide, please. Post-award report reminders. Here at NASA, we like to set you up for success. So when you have this is an example of a progress report. If you look at the box, the blue box on the right-hand side of the screen, the example is if you have a period performance of 5/16/23, that's your anniversary date. Well, your progress report or your performance report is actually due 60 days prior. And so 90 days prior, we will send out a reminder to let you know that your progress report is coming due for around your anniversary date. And for some reason, if you do not submit your progress report in a timely manner, then we'll start sending out delinquency notice 1 week after your report is actually due. After so many reminders, it could get elevated to the grant officer and the other corrective actions can be taken. If you're submitting your reports, here's a link. You can submit your reports to the technical officer and also here at NSSC, and all your final reports will be sent to close out. Next slide, please. Post-award monitoring corrective actions. If indicated during post-award monitoring that performance or financial management is unsatisfactory, non-compliant, or delinquent, the AGO and the technical officer will meet with the grantee and try to resolve the issue. If the recipient is unable to resolve the issue, NASA may impose additional terms and conditions on the award recipient. If additional conditions are not sufficient, then the GO must take one or more following corrective actions. And those corrective actions could be temporary withholding cash payments pending correction of deficiency, disallowing all or part of the cost of activity of actions or actions that are not in compliance, and also take other remedies that may be legally available. Next slide, please. Financial reports. When you're submitting your federal cash transaction report or moving forward your federal financial report, the grant officer are reviewing your reports for see if it's submitted timely. All your amounts or report are cumulative. All funding drawdowns are commensurate with award implementations. Also, recipients are must not draw down more funding than needed. And also, you want to make sure that you have that you're not going long periods of time from not drawing down from the payment management system from your grants. Please do not wait to the end of the grant to draw down all your funding. Try to do it periodically throughout the life cycle of the grant. Some other areas that we're reviewing on your financial report will be a review of excess cash on hand, review the pace of drawdown, the cost share review. And so we want to make sure that you guys are aware of what we're looking for when you submit your report. Some of the issues that we see with financial reporting is that 425s are not submitted in a timely manner. Other common issues that we see is that the 425 report is not available. Oftentimes that is because for some reason or another, the grantee has not successfully established their account with the payment management system. So please make sure you're working with our finance department to make sure you're all set up with the payment management system. And that way you're able to draw down your funds and also submit your reports in timely manner. Next slide, please. Transaction testing review. The purpose of the transaction testing review is to systematically test for all payments and expenditure transactions from a selected period. As I said before, each grant will be reviewed once in a 5-year period. We're trying to identify any potential unallowable, allocable, and unreasonable costs and excessive likelihood that the recipient areas would result in the material effect of federal awards. How the transaction testing process works. You will receive an email here from NSSC requesting that you submit your either your financial reports or your expenditure log during a specific quarter. You have 14 business days to submit the information to us. We review that information and we're checking for unallowable, unallocable, and unreasonable costs. There is no questionable costs, and most transaction testing review can be completed in 60 days. If there are questionable costs, then it's a possibility that the process is 90 days.
Sorry, would it be possible to speak up a little bit?
Yes.
Here over the.
And we may want to mention this, I think it may be the storm.
Yeah, so sorry for we got a couple of messages about the poor audio. But I'm sorry about that. We are having a rainstorm down here in a tropical storm down here in southern Mississippi. So we'll try to do the best that we can with that, but I apologize more. Please go ahead.
And some of the issues, the common issues that we see with transactional testing, again, is submitting the financial report or the expenditure log report in the time. Also, we're not allowed to charge fees on grants, so oftentimes we'll see in the reporting that grantees charge fees. And also very important, and Latessa mentioned it earlier, anytime there's key personnel changes, please let your technical officer and your grant officer know, because when your transaction testing report for review, we notice that personnel that were originally submitted in the original proposal are not in the transaction report that you guys send to us. So we're asking, please just always with your technical officer and your grant officer. Next slide. Communication is very important. All communication for the AGO should be sent to the NASA contact center and CC AOR, TO, and the PI. We realize each institution is different, but here at NASA Shared Service Center, the fastest way for us to look up your award is by your award number. Yes, we can find it by your proposal number or by the PI, but it's just so much easier and faster for us to here at NASA Shared Service Center to identify by the award number. So please, when communicating, please make sure you include the award number. Next slide, please. Here's some resources, and the links are provided as well that help you be successful. You've heard about the 2 CFR 200 during this presentation, 2 CFR 1800, the GCAM proposers guide. Also, there's a great tutorial, grants and agreement manuals 101 that's out there on YouTube right now as well. And then if you need to request a no-cost extension, that link is there. PI transfers and all the required documents to submit a PI transfer is on through that link as well. If you ever want status on the grant, you can go to our grant status page, and also here's a link to the payment management system when it comes to drawing down the questions. Next slide. And here's some acronyms or abbreviations that you may have heard during this presentation. You wasn't for sure what the acronym was. I mean, the abbreviations were. So here's just a helpful guide.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Morris and Latessa. I very much appreciate that presentation. I'm now going to turn over the floor to Mike Williams from the closeout team to discuss the grant closeout procedures. So, Mike, take it away, and we appreciate again your presentation.
All right, thanks, Corey. This slide lists my contact information as well as our program manager, Kevin Nash's contact information. you ever have any questions or having any trouble, you can always reach out to us. Next slide, please. So the grant and cooperative agreement closeout process starts at the pop-in date. And once we receive the award, and we being the closeout contractor team. So we are contractors that NASA has hired to do the closeout of these awards. And we can be reached at nssc-closeout@mail.nasa.gov. That's an important email address. And any questions can be routed there as well. So as the recipient of a NASA award, you have 120 days from the period of performance end date to provide all final deliverables, including the SF 425 financial report. That's the final report, which covers the full period of performance. The final technical report or summary of research report, a property report, and a new technology report. And negative reporting is required for property and new technology. The closeout contractor team will send automated reminders monthly for any award that is within the 120-day reporting period. And then those automated messages will go out weekly after that until all reports are received. So if you're still receiving those messages, please reach out to us. If you have submitted your reports, let us know. You can let me know directly. I will research it and update our system if that's what's needed. Next slide, please. Any payment request submitted after the 120-day reporting period will now automatically be placed on hold within the payment management system. And it has to go through an approval process, and it could be rejected. So please do your drawdowns timely within the 120-day reporting period. A recipient, I'm going to read this word for word. It's a lot of words here, but bear with me because it's important. A recipient is considered non-compliant with the terms and conditions of an award when they do not provide acceptable final reports by the identified due date or an extension granted under these conditions. The grant officer must initiate unilateral closeout without the cooperation of the recipient of the award within 270 days of the due date of the final report. So bottom line is, closeout has to occur within 1 year of the period of performance end date. And if we have to do it unilaterally, then the grant officer is required to report the non-compliance, and that could affect the risk assessment for future awards. So please do your reporting in a timely manner. Next slide, please. Once received, the final SF 425 financial report is sent to NASA's Finance Management Division for reconciliation. They reconcile between that form, the NASA financial system, and the payment management system, including the disbursements reported and the funds drawn. So all three of the systems have to match. The form and the two systems have to match to the penny before it can be reconciled. So the FMD will follow up with the closeout contractor for resolution, and then we will follow up with you for resolution of any financial discrepancies. Next slide, please. So just some of the background on what we have to do to final close each and every award. Once we receive all of your final reporting, grant officer signs off on a contract completion statement, contract closeout checklist, which identifies when all of those reports were received, the financial reconciliation, performance validation form. So the technical officer has to review performance on your award, and that is initiated by the submission of your final technical report. And so the closeout package is put together and signed by the closeout grant officer. the closeout package is added to the official file, and that file is then prepared for records retention. Next slide. So some best practices. Communicate often with your grant officer and the closeout team. Keep your contact information current. And if there's someone else that you want to be copied on any emails, you can let us know. We can add that into our system for correspondence. Coordinate PI transfer activities as early as possible. One of the issues we have in closeout is the word comes to us, and then later down the road, it's decided that a PI transfer needs to be worked. That takes a lot of time, and it delays closeout of the award. During the closeout period, do not unilaterally credit or debit your grant account post-reconciliation. Coordinate any changes that are needed with the grant officer and the closeout team, because uncoordinated activities create delays and paperwork. It also costs NASA extra fees for the payment management system, things like that, and it can really slow down the process. And proactively complete your deliveries. Again, can't stress that enough. Failure to complete timely can harm future grant opportunities. Next slide. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mike. I appreciate that presentation. So it's now time for our second of the two Q&A periods. Like the last period, I'm going to start with a pre-submitted question during that was submitted during the registration process. As we're discussing those questions, if you think of any more questions that you want to ask, feel free to put them into the box. I know we are receiving a bunch of questions. We'll get to as many as we can in the time that we have remaining. Fortunately, we do have a little bit extra time on this particular block to address some of these questions. So the first question I wanted to sort of just open up to the room to sort of see and let folks sort of answer this question as they feel. One of the questions that we got during the pre-registration process was, what are the most common institutional missteps for recipients regarding your area to avoid in administering NASA grants and cooperative agreements, and how would they be avoided? I want to ask, I'll turn to the NSSC first and see what thoughts you have about that.
From an administrative standpoint, some of the most common steps is not submitting your reports timely. Also, if there are changes needed to your award, to make sure you reach out to the correct point of contact, your administrative grant officer, to make sure that requests can be viewed to see if we need to issue an amendment to the award. So there are times that those requests may be sent to the TO and not get forwarded to the administrative grant officer. So it causes issues on the back end. If we later find out that, for instance, a PI has changed and we were not aware of.
From a program perspective, I want to see if Max or Sarah could talk a little bit about what they think the most common institutional missteps are for the recipients from a program perspective.
In my experience, as a former technical officer for grants from science, I think the most common mistake that I see is somebody, the principal investigator of the grant, is making a significant change, like reprogramming funds, or this co-investigator, hey, this postdoc has moved on and we're hiring a new, a change of key personnel, something significant like that. And the PI alone, without their AOR included, writes to the technical officer, one of my scientists, who, odds are 50-50 chance they don't know any better either. And they say, yeah, that sounds good, sure. Not understanding that officially it should be communication from the AOR of the institution, somebody who can speak for the institution, and that ultimately that must be approved by a grant officer at the NSSC. We as scientists can say, technically, I've looked at the CV of this new person, and technically, I say this person is adequate, right? And the NSSC will want that, but ultimately, it's got to be officially done by the NSSC. So I think that's something that maybe some PIs don't know or they forget. Over.
And I'll just add to that, just to kind of emphasize what Max and both Latessa mentioned, is the communication with your grant officer should be your first line of defense. They serve as the liaison between NASA and yourself as the grantee. So I would just encourage you to always communicate with your grant officer. It's not to say that you are prohibited from including your technical officer. We actually encourage you to also include your technical officer, but please never leave out your grant officer. That is your best friend throughout this process.
Sarah, I see you come on camera. Did you want to add?
Yes, thanks, Anthony. I just wanted to add, although I'm new to NASA and new to NASA Closeout, I wanted to share in other federal agencies that I've worked with, there were a lot of audit findings for failing to maintain adequate financial or program records like invoices and receipts. So I know that varies, but that has come up a lot in prior audits that I've worked. So I just wanted to make that note.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, for all of you, for your perspectives on that question. That actually, I think, is one of the best questions we've received in terms of helping elucidate some, that we are three sort of pieces to a puzzle at NASA. We have policy, the process at the NSSC, and of course the programs represented by Sarah and Max. I actually want to turn my next question to Mike and Closeout. One of the questions that we got is, can you confirm, will the AOR and the PI receive all of the email reminders discussed in the grant closeout process? Is it possible to add or to change who gets those communications?
So yes, as soon as my team receives an award for closeout, the AOR and PI will receive all of the email reminders from that point forward. And yes, you can change who gets or add people to get those reminders by emailing the nssc-closeout@mail.nasa.gov and include your award number and who you would like copied on those messages, and we could get them added.
Awesome. Thank you so much. The next question that we have is for the NSSC grants team. And I also want to add on, because we're seeing some questions about this as it relates to the answer that I think that we're going to get from the NSSC is the question that I have for the NSSC is, can you talk a little bit about the systems that NASA uses in post-award, and as that relates going forward to particularly the financial report, the SF 425, the FFR, what that would look like going forward, and what was the reason, and I'll turn to GBC and both the NSSC, sort of what was the impetus behind those changes, but starting with the sort of a discussion of what systems we use generally in post-award, if any.
The two main systems that we use in post-award would be PPS and also the payment management system. And the payment management system is where the grantees will submit their financial report.
And I think there was a part 2 to the question inquiring about the change from FCTR to FFR. And fortunately, that is not a change that was made specifically for NASA. This is a federal-wide change coming down from HHS and the change to their payment management system.
Thank you guys for that. Yeah, that is something coming up, and that policy will be implemented for the quarter ending 12/31/2024. We did push that back 1 quarter's worth of time to give you all some time to adjust to that policy change and to give us some time to make sure that everyone was aware of that policy change and how that would impact their operations. The next question, I actually do want to turn to GPC. This is we got a lot of questions in the pre-registration process about related to the nationality of PIs or recipients. I know we talked about this in our last Ask NASA event focused on pre-award, but can you talk a little bit about the policies around awards issued to foreign nationals or foreign institutions? And what does the disclosure look like if this happens post-award?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Corey. So NASA, as per our policy, NASA rarely issues grants or cooperative agreements to foreign entities. Typically, when we work with a foreign entity, we do it on a no exchange of funds basis. So we are collaborating with that foreign entity, but there's no money going from NASA to that foreign entity. In rare cases, we will issue a grant or cooperative agreement to a foreign entity, but that requires additional approvals from NASA leadership. When it comes to individuals' nationality, we don't take that into account. Right? We don't issue grants to individuals. We always issue grants to entities, and we don't take the individual nationalities into account when we're issuing grants or cooperative agreements. When it comes to, I think the second part of your question was about disclosing. Was it disclosing citizenship?
So what if you needed to make a disclosure on a foreign national, how would that go about? How does that look like?
Yes, so again, we don't have a requirement to disclose foreign nationalities in general, or actually any nationality. We do have restrictions on doing business or issuing grants or cooperative agreements to entities that are collaborating with China, the Chinese government, or Chinese or entities that are come under the laws of the government of China, right? But those restrictions do not apply to Chinese nationals, right? So again, those are restrictions that apply to Chinese entities. So as a matter of policy, we prohibited working with any Chinese entities, not Chinese nationals. So the restriction does not apply to nationals.
And from a general standpoint, it's about your affiliation, not your nationality.
Important distinction. Thank you, guys. So the next question that we got in the chat is for GPC and NSSC. Once an indirect labor rate is approved for one award, does the same rate need to be used for all future awards from NASA? As a follow-on, is that rate considered our indirect labor rate for other government agency grants?
So essentially, your indirect cost rate is the responsibility of your cognizant and oversight agency. So that rate is not determined based on an individual award or an individual entity or agency in this matter. Your indirect cost rate should be determined by your cognizant agency, and that is to be used across federal awards.
And from an NSSC standpoint, we will use that indirect rate for your award unless it has been some amended, you received a newer rate, then we will move forward with a newer rate on your future award.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, if your entity does not have a negotiated rate, which we call a negotiated indirect cost rate agreement, or a NICRA, if your entity does not have an active NICRA, your entity can use what's called the de minimis rate, which is a 10% rate that you can apply to your grant cooperative agreement. And you can only use a de minimis rate if you've never had a NICRA or if you don't have an active NICRA.
Thank you guys for that. So the next question that we got in the chat is for the NSSC, I believe. It's about prior approval requests. So once a prior approval requests are approved by NASA, should we expect a formal award mod, or should the recipient expect approval only by email?
I'll take that one. So for prior approvals, let's just say for budget reallocation, you want to move some money around in your budget. That's just simply getting concurrence from the technical officer and then approval from the grant officer, and all that. The whole entire transaction is done via email. But we'll also add it to your postal work file.
Thank you very much. Actually, I have one more question for you guys that was pre-submitted. Can you give some advice on how to stay organized and on task in order to administer grant and cooperative agreements properly? I think that was actually a really interesting question.
From an administrative grant officer standpoint, we highly recommend that you refer to your required reports and publications. It outlines your reporting requirements, the frequency of those requirements. You can set up calendars, taskers to help give you reminders of when those reports are actually due. As a courtesy, we also send out automated email reminders to let you know when those reports are also due.
Awesome. For the NSSC, another question that we had in the chat, I had an APRA proposal that was selected in May 2022. I was notified via an email from Inspires. I received a notification letter, panel evaluation and proposal status summary, but no NF 1687 or contact sheet. I have also not been contacted by NSSC with any information about annual reporting or other required reports, publications. Where would I find that information?
Was that the question from Will Scott?
Yeah, so.
Scott Will, I beg your pardon.
Yes, sorry, I just moved away from it, but yeah, I believe it was.
Is that the APRA one?
Yes, it was. from
Yeah,
Scott.
I'm looking into it. I like freaked out when I didn't see any entry for this in the NSSC database until I saw that he was writing from a nasa.gov address. So
Okay, all right.
it's not a grant, it's internal to the government. I'll reply.
Okay, thank you, Max. I appreciate that. One question that let's see what the next question. So the next question I wanted to talk about is is for GPC. We had some interest in our pre-selected or pre-registration questions about the conflict of interest policy that's going to be implemented in December. Can you talk a little bit about what that involves and what is it that we're actually going to be releasing in December?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Corey. So NASA has issued a new conflict of interest disclosure policy, and the goal with this policy is to standardize our conflict of interest or COI disclosure requirements with those of other federal research funding agencies, namely NSF and NIH. In a nutshell, what our COI policy states is that for every senior and key personnel that's working on an award, they need to disclose to an individual at their entity significant financial interests that they might have. And so they're going to disclose their significant financial interests to a designated individual. That designated individual will review them to determine if any conflicts of interest exist. If a conflict of interest does exist, then the entity needs to take actions to either eliminate or manage or reduce that conflict. And if they are able to do that, then they don't need to report that conflict to NASA at all. Right? They just manage, reduce, or eliminate the conflict, and they're good to continue working. If the entity, for whatever reason, cannot manage, reduce, or eliminate that conflict of interest, then it needs to be reported to your NASA grant officer. From there, the administrative taken to and the entirety of that conflict of interest policy can be found on the grant website. It goes into effect, meaning that we expect all of our grant recipients to all of our entities that receive new grants to comply with it starting in December.
Actually, so this is not on the subject, so thank you for that, Chris. I saw a question at some point throughout the presentation relating to the single audits and the responsibility of the cost. So you are, as a grantee or recipient, you're required to procure those services for the single audits if your entity expends $750,000 in grant fund expenditures or more. The good news, so that's the bad news. The good news is you can and you are allowed, it's an allowable cost to charge those expenses incurred to your awards.
Very good. The next question we have is for the NSSC. Is there a way to find out our risk score, if that's the right term, How would that be communicated to them? Is it generally something that is communicated to the recipients on the risk score?
We don't provide that information, but if you're requesting a risk score, we can provide it to you. But please be mindful, if you request your risk score, is that your entity specific score will remain the same for 3 years, because we review the entity or institution every 3 years. And your award specific score could change per each award that's being evaluated. So your total score, if we, for example, for one award, your score could be a little bit higher, a little bit less, based on your awards. But if you wanted your overall score, you can.
Follow on, so for the NSSC, again, we had a question from, again, from Scott. Where do you find out who my grant officer is and technical officer?
That information is on your NASA Form 1687 and Block 12, your points of contact.
If this is the same person as before, he should look for an email from me. If this is the person with the nasa.gov address, then this is an internal award.
Okay.
So again, is that, was that from Scott Will?
Yeah, it was. Thank you, Max. I appreciate that.
Scott, look for an email from me that I just sent to you.
Thank you, Max, for being on top of it.
The next question we got is from Paige Metcalf. I have a question about documentation requirements for hiring independent contractors to carry out program activities. Can a single independent contractor agreement encompass activities from several different federal and non-federal awards? That's a tough one.
I'm just trying to make sure. Can you go back up to the amount?
Yes, I can take a stab at it. So I think the question is about hiring an independent contractor to help out with grant activities. And they're asking if that independent contractor can help out with activities from several different federal awards. I would say no, right? Because the activities that the contractor is performing need to be relevant to that specific award. So if you have contractors performing activities for a NASA award, and you're also paying them out of their NASA award to support another agency's award, right? NASA doesn't want to be paying with our awards. So I would say, just based on this question, not knowing all the details, no.
Yeah. Hopefully we're understanding the question correctly.
But also, I also recommend this individual to reach out to us, right? If you have an active grant with NASA, reach out to your grant officer, provide more details, because we might be interpreting the question incorrectly.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. The next one I actually have is for the NSSC grants team. I wanted to talk a little bit about this because in our pre-submitted questions and comments, the most pre-submitted questions and comments we had were about changes, post-award modifications. So I wanted to ask them if you could expand on, I know you touched on your presentation a bit about modifications in post-award. Can you talk a little bit about common issues you see with recipients and changes and modifications? And specifically, if somebody is seeking a modification such as a PI change or a period of performance extension, what are some common mistakes that folks make in submitting those requests to the NSSC to make sure that they are effectuated and approved by NASA?
Well, for a no-cost extension, the most common maybe not having the supporting documentation for the grant officer to move forward with processing the supplement to complete the no-cost extension. And that is usually a performance report. For PI transfer, a lot of times when a PI is going from one institution to another institution, the grant officer is not even aware in a timely manner. They may have told the technical officer again and have not notified the grant officer. And so once we find out it's late very late. Sometimes the grant may be near closeout before we even find out that the PI has been at a new institution. And so we kind of have to work quickly to get the required documents in order to relinquish the award from the old institution to the replacement institution.
Yeah, so I appreciate this for the comment. Thank you for the reminder to bring back the question on awards. So the question was from the first period. And I actually do want to turn to the NSSC and see if you have any thoughts on this particular question. The requester would like to know, they said this is very frustrating that we cannot view awards in the system similar to NIH ERA Commons. We of course know that we don't have a system similar to NIH ERA Commons. It seems only NOAs are sent to the PI and the AOR submitting the application. Is it possible to add an email address in the proposed field for where NOA emails are to be sent? I'm reading that question to me, are we beyond those 2 points of contact, but is it possible to send the award documentation to more than just those individuals?
Yes, it's possible. We have had AORs, once we reach out to the AOR and distribute the award, they'll come back and say, well, can you add this POC to the distribution list? So it is possible to add additional emails to the distribution.
All right, and would they reach out to you all to?
Yes, reach out to the grant officer.
All right. Hey, Max, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I know of an institution that created a shared mailbox. You know, it's like grants@institution.com or .edu, whatever. So that then that was the address that they always used for the address of the AOR, but like all the AORs could see it. We're starting to do something similar with our technical officers as well. Over.
Thank you very much for that, Max. And it looks like we're butting up against time, so I'm gonna end the Q&A period there.
Can I jump in just really quickly, because I do see your question here about the single audit cost charged to an award. Is that a direct or indirect cost? So it's going to depend on the awards that your institution has received. So if you've only received a NASA award and you incur the cost, then it's direct cost. However, that would change if you have multiple awards across different federal organizations.
Thank you. So we snuck one in under the wire. So I appreciate that, Anthony's. So I'm going to move to the resources slide. But before we close, I want to provide you some NASA and federal government-wide resources and information to reference on your grant journey. You will also receive a survey on today's events in 2 ways. The survey will appear when you log off today and will also be emailed tomorrow morning with a link for you to share your thoughts in that format. Please fill out the survey only once, and we appreciate your feedback and suggestions for future events. We will also make the slides available on GPC's website for future reference. I would like to take a moment to express my gratitude to the panelists for sharing their valuable insights and expertise. Your contributions have been truly enlightening, and we are deeply grateful for the time and effort that you have devoted to this event. I would also like to thank the NSSC for your partnership in hosting this event. I would also like to thank all of the participants for your questions and engagement. You have shown us your passion and curiosity for NASA's mission and vision, and I'm sure you'll do amazing things with your grant projects, and we look forward to your continued partnership and seeing the future only you all can bring us. I hope you all enjoyed this event as much as I enjoyed hosting it, and with that, I will say goodbye and thank you again for joining us today. Have a wonderful rest of your day and take care.
Thank you.
No problem.